across Israel during the course of the conflict. 4 of them yesterday, just before that ceasefire came into force. Those are the funerals that are taking place today. It is the evidence, if any Israelis doubted it, of the threat that Iran can pose even without a nuclear weapon. And some will be calling for retribution for those lives that have been lost, even though there is now supposed to be a ceasefire in place. Some Israelis will be questioning whether all this conflict, the fights that Israel is engaged in on so many different fronts, are actually resulting in any greater safety for them in this country. There's been so much disruption to normal life over the past 12 days and to some degree over the past 20 months since the October the 7th attacks. Israelis living with the reality of repeated air raid siren warnings, the disruption to transport networks, the economy. The airports are still not back to normal yet, although we are seeing some normality return to workplaces, offices and some of the transport networks today. Israelis have put up with a lot of damage, destruction, a lot of damage to their economy as well. And some will be questioning whether everything that Benjamin Netanyahu does actually returns greater safety for them. He was, of course, facing massive protests.
Dan, I'm just going to interrupt you because it appears President Trump is making an appearance at that NATO summit in The Hague. Just trying to see exactly whether he is there at the summit. I think he's making some remarks. Let's just take a listen.
NATO is going to become very strong. Perhaps you want to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me first, before we go to the spending, I just want to recognize your decisive action in Iran.
Thank you.
You are a man of strength, but you're also a man of peace. And the fact that you are now also successful in getting this ceasefire done between Israel and Iran, I really want to commend you for it.
Thank you.
And I think this is important for the whole world. Then on spending, it's absolutely true. I want to state here, without President Trump, this would not have happened. In 3 stages. When you became president in 2016, 2017, you forced Europeans and Canadians to pay more. At this moment, the result of that phase is 1 trillion extra aggregate defense spending by the Canadians and the Europeans. Then came phase 2, when you became president in January last year. Phase 2 is that all other countries not yet on 2% have now committed to the 2%. This is the old goal from Wales in 2014. 7 were not on 2%, some were saying somewhere in the 2030s. Now this year, all of them, including Canada, including Italy, including Belgium, they have all now committed to the 2%. And now comes the big splash. Today, we will decide to go to 5%. We have to keep ourselves safe from our adversaries, but also because it is fair to equalize with the United States. With this 5%, the Europeans and the Canadians will equalize their defense spending with the United States. So this is not about American taxpayers paying more. This is about Europeans, Canadians paying more. And again, this would not have happened. I'm really saying this here. And some people might criticize me, but then when I speak with them, they all say, yes, you're right. This would not have happened if you would not have been elected in 2016 and re-elected last year and back into office in January. So I want to thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great victory for everybody, I think. And we will be equalized very shortly, and that's the way it has to be. It's going to be a lot of money, too, a lot of defense.
Trillions extra.
Yeah, and we have a great relationship, and we've had a great relationship from the beginning. Highly respected man, and yeah, we appreciate you being here too, everybody. We really do. We have a tremendous group of people on my left and a tremendous group of people on my right. They might be even better than my people. I don't know. Let's have a fight. Let's figure it out. Anyway, but we appreciate it, and we've had a tremendous relationship, Mark and I, and we've really worked on this subject for a long time.
Yeah.
When Biden was here, it just died like everything else died. And now it's either take
a brief word to say goodbye to our viewers watching on PBS.
So we can't talk about it until the vote's taken, because sometimes, you know, strange things happen to us. But I think you're going to.
I'm not too worried.
I think you're going to do very well. Everyone's very happy about it. Go ahead. Yes.
Mr. President, how is the Iran-Israel ceasefire going, in your opinion?
I think very good. I think very good. Israel came back yesterday. I was so proud of them because they came back. You know, they went out because they felt there was a violation, and technically they were right, but it just wouldn't have worked out very well. And they brought the planes back. They had gone on to another journey because there was a little bit of a violation. And I said, you got to get them back. and they came back, and it was a great thing, and it's going very well.
Mr. President, what are your sort of response to the foreign minister saying he still wants to enrich nuclear?
Hello, Katie. She's so great, this one. Any question she asks, I'll answer. Well, maybe I better not say that. What was your question?
What is your response to the Iranian foreign minister continuing to say Iran will enrich uranium and pursue nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't know if they've said that, but I'll tell you, the last thing they want to do is enrich anything right now. They want to recover. And we won't let that happen, number one. Militarily, we won't. I think we'll end up having somewhat of a relationship with Iran. I see it. Look, I've had a relationship over the last 4 days. They agreed to the ceasefire. And it was a very equal agreement. They both said, that's enough. They both said it. But no, they won't do that. The last thing they want to do, Katie, is enrich. They're not looking to... They're not... Can you imagine after all of that, they're going to say, oh, let's go and do a bomb. You know, there could be a day in the future, and then somebody else taking our place will be saying, don't do it. And maybe they won't do it as well, I don't know. But they're not going to have a bomb, and they're not going to enrich. And we believe all of the stuff is down there. We don't think they had nearly the time, because to get that out is a very difficult thing. It's not like moving a package or taking this carpet up and moving it. It's very difficult. It's very dangerous to do. We believe it's all down there. We had a tremendous victory, a tremendous hit, and because of that, I don't think they would have been down there, because they knew we were coming. When they know we're coming, they're not going to be down in that 30 stories underground. So no, I think it was just a tremendous victory for everybody, including Iran. Look, they've got a country, and they've got oil, and they're very smart people, and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings. And they've been great. Bibi Netanyahu should be very proud of himself. And they've really been great. But they're not going to be building bombs for a long time.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to the intelligence reports saying that the Iranian nuclear sites were only partially devastated, not entirely?
Yeah, well, they said it was actually, the report said it could have been they don't know. I mean, they did a report. I could have Pete talk to it because his department did the report. They really don't know. I think Israel's going to be telling us very soon, because Bibi is going to have people involved in that whole situation. We hear it was obliteration. It was a virtual obliteration. When you take a look at the ground above, don't forget, the flame is all underground. But everything above, if you look at the before and the after picture, everything above is burned black, the trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the granite, so that, the fire goes right over it. I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it. Plus, they knew we were coming, and if they know we're coming, they're not going to be down there. There aren't too many people that are going to be down there. Pete, do you have something to say about that?
Well, Mr. President, when you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to. So it was a flawless mission.
Flawless.
Right down where we knew they needed to enter. And given the 30,000 pounds of explosives and capability of those munitions, it was devastation underneath Fordo. And the amount of munitions, 6 per location, any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary, it was low confidence. All right, so this isn't, you make assessments based on what you know.
And it said it could be very devastating, very serious.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
Is there a leak investigation?
Of course. We're doing a leak investigation with the FBI right now because this information is for internal purposes, battle damage assessments, and CNN and others are trying to spin it to make the president look bad when this was an overwhelming success.
We had a tremendous success, and this is the New York Times. I call it the failing New York Times. It's going to hell. And CNN, which, as you know, very few people are watching. And you would think they'd do the opposite. You would think they'd want to say, this was an unbelievable success. And the thing that hurts me is it's really demeaning to the pilots and the people that put that whole thing together, the generals. That was a perfect operation. And when you look at the holes, and this was done from 52,000 feet, there was no moon, there was no light, and those 3 holes are right together. And also, and nobody talks about this, we shot 30 Tomahawks from submarines, in particular one submarine, but that was 400 miles away. And every one of those Tomahawks hit within a foot of where they were supposed to hit. Took out a lot of buildings that Israel wasn't able to get. We took them out with Tomahawks. We don't even talk about that. This was a devastating attack, and it knocked them for a loop. And you know, if it didn't, they wouldn't have settled. If they had won, if we didn't take it out, they wouldn't have settled. Somebody mentioned that to me last night. If that thing wasn't devastated, they would have never settled. Marco, do you have something to say?
No, first of all the stuff about the intelligence, this is what a leaker is telling you the intelligence says. That's the game these people play. They read it, and then they go out and characterize it the way they want it characterized, and they're leakers. This is the game they play. So that's number one. Number two, here's a fact. The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility, we can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map. You can't even find where it used to be because the whole thing is just blackened out. It's gone.
It's wiped out.
It's wiped out. Then we dropped 12 of the strongest bombs on the planet right down the hole in 2 places. Everything underneath that mountain is in bad shape. And I refer you to the statement of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi.
Yes.
You know what he said? He said there was Iran, the way it looked the day before the attack, and what their nuclear program looks like now. 2 very different things. They are way behind where they were just 7 days ago. Now, anything in the world can be rebuilt. But now we know where it is, and if they try to rebuild it, we'll have options there as well. But all this leaker stuff, these leakers are professional stabbers. That's what they are. They go out and they read this stuff, and then they tell you what it says against the law, but they characterize it for you in a way that's absolutely false. There's no way Iran comes to the table if somehow nothing had happened. This was complete and total obliteration. They're in bad shape. They are way behind today compared to where they were just 7 days ago because of what the president did.
Marco, can I just alert you to one other aspect? So the great thing is you took out the nuclear capability of Iran. This was crucial. You did it in a way which is extremely impressive. But the signal sends to the rest of the world that this president, when it comes to it, yes, he is a man of peace, but if necessary, he is willing to use strength, the enormous strength of the American military. So I think that signal to the rest of the world, this is far beyond Iran, is extremely important. So let me also point us to that aspect of what happens.
They went down, Iran went down to the site afterwards. They said it's so devastated, and they settled when they saw what we did to it. And frankly, if we didn't do that, they would have had a lot of ammunition to keep going. They wouldn't have settled. Somebody brought that up, and 2 Iranians went down to see it, and they called back, and they said, this place is gone. So it's just fake news by CNN, which has got no ratings. It's a failed network. Anybody here from CNN, by the way? Because you're a really disgraceful network. MSNBC, I think, is actually worse. But they're all pretty bad. But yours is good, Katie, I'll tell you.
Mr. President,
You know what Marco reminded me that he did such a nice job there? It was 9 years ago I had to debate this guy. He was not easy. I think he even got better. But when you were into your little thing, I said, this is when I had to debate this guy. You think it's easy to debate him? It's not easy.
How long do you think that the Iranian nuclear program has been put back by these strikes? Years or totally obliterated?
I think basically decades, because I don't think they'll ever do it again. I just don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to take their oil, they're going to have some missiles, and they'll have some defense. I think they've had it. I mean, they just went through hell. I think they've had it. The last thing they want to do is enrich. They've been trying to do it. By the way, it's hard to enrich. And, you know, when you look at a site like that, very, very hard to build. Very, very hard, very expensive. They spent trillions of dollars trying to do this thing, and they didn't come up with it. And we're actually getting along with them very well right now. But had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
If the Iranians do rebuild, would the United States...
If they rebuild?
Would the United States strike again? And I have also a question about Russia.
But I'm not going to have to worry about that. It's gone for years. Very tough to rebuild because the whole thing has collapsed. In other words, inside, it's all collapsed. nobody can get in to see it because it's collapsed. You can't go in to see a room that has, 10 million tons of rock in it. And the tunnels are totally collapsed.
But if they rebuild?
Well, they've already looked at the tunnels. This was an unbelievable hit by genius pilots and genius people in the military, and they're not being given credit for it because we have scum that's in this group, and not all of you are. You have some great reporters, but you have scum. CNN is scum. MSDNC is scum. The New York Times is scum. They're bad people. They're sick. And what they've done is they're trying to make this unbelievable victory into something less. Now, even they admit that it was hit very hard, okay? But it wasn't hit hard. It was hit brutally, and it knocked it out. The original word that I use, I guess it got us in trouble because it's a strong word. It was obliteration. And you'll see that. And it's going to come out. Israel is doing a report on it now, I understand. And I was told that they said it was total obliteration. They have guys that go in there after the hit, and they say it was total obliteration. And I don't want it for me. I want it for the pilots. I want it for the military. They did such a good job. If you were in the Situation Room with me, with the generals and all of the people that did such a good job, and then they get demeaned by these idiots at CNN who can't get ratings, the place is dying, nobody wants to even waste their time going on their shows. So they form with the New York Times, who's dying also. Without Trump, you wouldn't have a New York Times.
And then just changing gears to your meeting with Zelensky later today, can you give us any preview of what the two of you might be discussing?
No, well, we'll discuss the obvious. We'll discuss his difficulty. He's got a little difficulty. Zelensky, he's a nice guy. I mean, I'm going to meet him today. I don't know. I assume we're going to be discussing Ukraine.
Yes.
And it seems like the most likely.
Is there any restart talks there or anything that you might do?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, I've spoken to Putin a lot, and he actually was very nice. He volunteered help on, as you know, on Iran. I said, no, I don't need help on Iran. I need help on Russia. Okay? I said, do me a favor. Help us on Russia, not on Iran. But he was very nice. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk. I think progress is being made. I think great progress is being made on Gaza. I think because of this attack that we made, I think we're going to have some very good news. I was talking to Steve Witkoff, who, by the way, is terrific, and who knows more about this subject than anybody, the subject of what we were just talking about. He was on last night with Jesse and with Laura and with Sean. And boy, Susie has a great take on it. He just explains it so easily. He's really very knowledgeable. But he did tell me that Gaza is very close.
Mr. President, just one follow-up on Iran. Both you and Secretary Rubio and Hexet mentioned the leak. But can you clarify, is the intelligence correct or is the intelligence wrong?
Well, the intelligence was very inconclusive. Okay. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct. But I think we can take that we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration. And you'd think that a media outlet would say, isn't that a great thing? I mean, more importantly for the pilots, for the military, you take their guts out. You take their absolute guts out. They had a tremendous attack. There was a complete obliteration. The other team, the other group, Iran, said, let's stop this. And you know what? Israel said it too. Very smart. They fought like hell, and then they said, let's stop. And they're going to build themselves. And I really see it as sticking. I mean, we may do papers on it, Marco. Maybe we're going to do papers. I don't even know if you need them. They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easy to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
I think we have to join the house.
Yes, we're going to join some other group. Yes, thank you. Katie, one
last question. Do you believe...
She's so good. That's the only reason.
Thank you, Mr. President.
She used to be very difficult, but now she's... Go ahead.
Do you believe that this strike on the Iranian nuclear program will lead to the release of the hostages in Gaza?
I think that it helped a little bit. It showed a lot of power. Yeah, I think it helped, but we're going to get separately, even before this, we were very close to making a deal on Gaza. I think this helped, yes. Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Thank you, President.
Thanks, guys.
Standing there.
Well, that was Donald Trump and Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, taking questions at that NATO summit in The Hague. Some interesting points there, just to take you through a few things that were said. Mark Rutte, first of all, lavishing praise on Donald Trump. You'll remember that on the plane to the Netherlands, Donald Trump released a private message from Mark Rutte that was full of praise and very much written in Trumpian language, an extraordinary moment in itself. But Mark Rutte saying that it is down to Donald Trump taking office that NATO allies have committed to this increase in defence spending, now aiming for 5%. And he said that simply would not have happened if you had not won the election. Saying that you have shown that you are a man of strength, but you are also a man of peace. And then Donald Trump dealing first of all with the Iran war and the bombing campaign in Iran. He talked about the American bombing of the nuclear sites as being a tremendous victory, a tremendous hit. He repeated that this was complete obliteration of the nuclear sites. That, despite the fact that a preliminary assessment by Pentagon officials in America that has been leaked to American media suggests that actually they have not been completely destroyed, the nuclear sites, and that Iran's nuclear capacity may only have been set back by a few months. Donald Trump once again tearing into those American media outlets that published the report, saying that CNN and the New York Times were, in his words, scum, intending to demean the pilots and demean the perfect operation. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, also coming in and saying that it was a flawless operation. And yet, Pete Hegseth admitted that there was the existence of this report, but he said that it was a preliminary report with low confidence. Donald Trump also suggesting that Israelis were going in to make their own assessment. I mean, that would be an unusual circumstance if Israeli people were on the ground in Iran to go in and look at those facilities, but very much maintaining his line that this was total obliteration and saying that any attempt to deny that was completely treacherous. He also said that a leak investigation was underway about who leaked that to the American media, and maintaining that the nuclear capacity of Iran has been taken back, he said, for decades, suggesting that Iran will not now try to enrich. That is a big question because, of course, a country that has just been attacked for 12 days and which does potentially still have some kind of uranium stockpile may be inspired to rush to try to weaponize it. Well, he was also asked about Gaza, and he said there had been great progress on Gaza, and that despite the fact that there have been hundreds of people killed in Gaza over the last 12 days of the Iran war. Some 868 people killed, according to the local health officials in Gaza, while waiting for humanitarian aid, and also killed by Israeli soldiers. Let us speak to our Gaza correspondent, Rushdie Abu-Alouf. Rushdie, good to talk to you. Just tell us more about the casualties in the last 24 hours alone from Gaza, and also over the last 12 days that the media has been so much focused on Iran.
Yeah, about 23 people were killed since midnight. The latest 3 people near the Gaza humanitarian institution in Rafah. 3 people were killed, taken to the hospital. Early morning, about 6 people in different humanitarian distribution center, but also about 14 or 16 people were killed in different airstrike. And about 12 days of the escalation or the mini war between Iran and Israel, the war in Gaza continued. You know, about 860 or something people were killed. Maybe half of them were near the distribution centers, which Palestinians now say that it's became killing points for the people. What happened is that every night, thousands of people gather in big groups near these centers, and they wait for the center to distribute some food, because there is a lack of food, medicine, and fuel and everything in Gaza. What happened that the 3 or 4 centers are located in an area under Israeli control, that there is active Israeli troops in the place. There is always tanks around the place, and people often say that Israel using drones, quadcopter drones, to shoot people. The hospitals are overwhelmed by the number of people they receive every day from this kind of posts. Every day they ask people to donate blood, and also they urge people not to go close to these centers.
Rushdie, there are reports emerging in the news agencies that the US State Department is giving a $30 million grant to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that coming from the US Agency for International Development, which was effectively shuttered by Donald Trump, but reports that the US is giving $30 million, so very much kind of investing in this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Just explain what is the core issue here. Is it the mechanism, the way in which this new mechanism operates by giving out aid? Is it the fact that they are set up in areas of conflict? Is it the fact that it is the Americans and the Israelis kind of working together in this new mechanism? Why are so many people dying as they are waiting for aid?
Well, look, we have like 3 or 4 centers for the GHF, and they all in places under fully Israeli control, especially the ones in Rafah. They are real active Israeli combat operation in the place since March. So the people would go in a very huge number. Thousands of people will walk from Khan Yunis. Sometimes they walk 7-8 kilometers to reach this area. And it's always dark. There is always risk. Israeli soldiers in the place, Israeli drones above them. People are pushing to get into the center. So what the people are saying, when we did ask them, they said we have no other option to get food but to walk to this dangerous area. I asked one person, like, you have your friends killed yesterday, why you are going today again? He said, because my son and daughters are starving. So the mechanism itself is not sufficient, because the people in Gaza used to receive aid from UN agencies even before the 7th of October, and before this war, about 900,000 people. So the UN agencies, they have the capability, the centers, the stuff to do it. And instead of people walking in a very dangerous area to a center to get very few items of food, people used to get it distributed within their neighborhood. In every single neighborhood, there is a distribution center for the UN. So that's why every day, like, people are killed around this area. About the $30 million, I think what is Gaza needed, according to the people who closely work with the aid agencies, that they need about 500, 600 trucks every day into Gaza for at least 2 months to be able to meet the needs of the people. And each truck of them cost about $500,000. So even this money is very little comparing to what Gaza really needs.
Rushdie Abulov, our Gaza correspondent, thank you very much indeed. And also, there have been more deaths of Israeli soldiers in Gaza. 7 Israeli soldiers have been killed in the last 12 hours inside Gaza as their armoured vehicle was hit by an improvised explosive device. That, say the Israeli authorities, takes the number of Israeli soldiers killed since the ground offensive in Gaza began to 440. So the deaths mounting on both sides of this operation, despite Donald Trump saying that there is good news from Gaza, and he believes that the Gaza war could be wrapped up in the coming weeks. Much more to come from us throughout the day, but for now, back to Sarah in London.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so you can see on your screen there that that NATO summit is ongoing. We will take you there as soon as those opening remarks start. But let's, for the moment, go to Kenya, because hundreds of people there have taken to the streets across the country to mark 1 year since the start of anti-tax demonstrations that left at least 60 dead. The protests culminated in the storming of Parliament in Nairobi and a violent police crackdown. A controversial bill proposing big tax increases was subsequently withdrawn. Well, let's speak to the BBC's senior Africa correspondent, Anne Soy, who is in Nairobi for us. And Anne, a year on and more unrest on the streets of the capital. What's the situation there?
That's right. Crowds are gathering in town. There's a huge police operation across different parts of the capital and across the country in different towns where people have been gathering to commemorate the death of more than 60 people who were killed during the protests last year. On this day last year, Parliament was breached and we saw crowds of people running into Parliament and parliamentarians who had been meeting there to pass the controversial finance bill having to run for their lives. And on that day, some people were shot right outside Parliament. And that is what people are meeting today to commemorate, but also to agitate for justice, to the end of extrajudicial killings. And some of them have been calling for the end of this administration. And just to capture the mood, you can see these are some of the dailies. That is the Standard newspaper, the oldest newspaper in the country, just with the pictures of some of the people who were killed during the protests that culminated on the 25th of June last year with a breach into Parliament. And this is the Nation newspaper, which is the largest circulation in the country, also really capturing that moment. We have gone to different parts of the city and have seen police have set up barricades around Parliament using barbed wire. The first time that they are doing this, they are restraining people from coming into the city. On the outskirts, they are not allowing public service vehicles to drive into the city. And so there's a huge operation underway, but some crowds have made it to the city centre anyway. And we have also seen some crowds in different towns, like the coastal town of Mombasa and Nakuru towards the west of the country.
Yeah, and the activists and families of the victims, they have called for peaceful demonstrations. People in Kenya very much hoping that the widespread scenes last year won't be repeated this year.
That's right. That's the hope. We have seen police use tear gas in some instances. There have been calls for restraint on both sides. Earlier in the week, there were small demonstrations and we saw other groups of young people coming out with clubs, seemingly working alongside the police. The police have denied that they were working with them, and they were countering the protesters who had come out. Diplomats in the country have called on the government to desist from using what people are calling here hired goons to try and deal with the demonstrators, and have also cautioned against the use of police officers in plain clothes. They say that the law requires that police officers must be in their uniform, they must not be wearing masks, and have to be clearly identified. So crowds are still gathering. It's just gaining momentum. It's still early. It's around going to midday, and so we expect in the afternoon that we get really the mood on the ground.
Anne Soy there in Kenya, thank you. We'll keep across the situation, the developing situation in Nairobi. Thank you to you. You are just looking at pictures there from the NATO summit in The Hague there. These are the sort of photographs, all the leaders, the 32 leaders coming and joining Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, for those photographs at the beginning before the meeting proper starts this morning. Remember, this is being seen as a very significant meeting. It's the second day of the NATO summit, and really the emphasis is very much on unity. Pretty much all the leaders who've arrived at The Hague there today have talked about this issue of unity and this expected commitment to a new spending target of 5% of GDP on defence and related security, which the Secretary-General, Mark Rutte, a few minutes ago said would not have happened without President Trump. Please stay with us here on BBC News.
No. Live from The Hague, I'm Lucy Hockings. This is BBC News. President Trump has arrived at the NATO summit and he has already reaffirmed the US's commitment to the military bloc. This is the scene live right now at the summit as world leaders gather and discuss. You can see Mark Rutte here, the NATO chief, talking to various leaders who have arrived. We'll bring you the latest as it happens.
And I'm Mark Lowen in Tel Aviv, where after a shaky start, the ceasefire in the Israel-Iran war is holding. Meanwhile, President Trump tells NATO leaders that Iran's nuclear program has been set back for decades following US strikes.
I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material.
And the United Nations strongly criticizes the US and Israel-backed aid distribution system in Gaza, calling it ludicrous. It comes after 46 people were reportedly shot dead by the Israeli army while waiting for food.
I'm Sarah Campbell in London, also this hour. Hundreds have taken to streets across Kenya to mark 1 year since the start of anti-tax demonstrations that left at least 60 people dead. And the gates to the world-famous Glastonbury Festival officially open, with over 200,000 people expected at the Worthy Farm site.
Good morning from The Hague, where we've seen world leaders gathering for the NATO summit. We can take you live inside, actually. NATO Chief Mark Rutte just greeting all of the leaders as they arrive on the stage, having their photos taken. We just saw Giorgia Meloni, the leader of Italy, arrive and shake hands, but they'll just come out one by one as they meet. But what we were looking for, of course, was the arrival of President Trump. A historic summit, it's being seen as, some saying the most consequential that we've seen in the history of NATO, but all eyes have been on President Trump and what he would say today. Crucially, he reaffirmed the US's commitment to the military bloc, despite making some statements yesterday questioning the meaning of Article 5. He came out strongly this morning and said that NATO remains very strong as more member states commit to 5% of defence spending. That is being seen as a real win, not only for President Trump, but for Mark Rutte. But he then rejected a leaked US intelligence report that cast doubt over the success of America's strikes on Iran. He was sitting there alongside the Secretary General, and he told reporters that Tehran's nuclear program had been put back decades and described the scenes at the sites as virtual obliteration. Have a listen.
We hear it was obliteration. It was a virtual obliteration. When you take a look at the ground above, don't forget the flame is all underground. But everything above, if you look at the before and the after picture, everything above is burned black. The trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the granite, so that, you know, the fire goes right over it. I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it.
So that was President Trump speaking a short time ago. Remember, there was that leaked assessment from the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency that estimated these attacks at the weekend had set Iran's nuclear program back only a few months. This is something that has really angered President Trump, which is why we've seen him speak so strongly in the past hour or so. Let's take you to Tel Aviv. We can join my colleague Mark Lowen, who is there. Mark, what's your assessment of what we've just heard from the President?
Well, he was absolutely insistent that these sites had been completely obliterated, in his words, and that Iran's nuclear program had in effect been destroyed, despite, as you say, Lucy, that preliminary assessment that suggests that actually it has only been set back by a few months. And you know, you had a mixture of kind of hitting out at the American news outlets that carried this report, while actually an admission that the report in itself existed. But Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, said that that report was with low confidence. I think there's a lot about nuance here and a lot about wording, Lucy. Of course, Donald Trump wants to, despite the kind of usual bluster of kind of hitting out at CNN and others that he described as scum, he wants to present this as total victory, total obliteration. But the fact of the matter is that nobody quite knows yet. He suggested at one point that Israel would have officials going in and inspecting those sites, which I think would be highly unusual to have Israeli officials on the ground and quite possibly an instance of misspeaking. Interestingly, I've just seen a bit of copy from our correspondent in Vienna, which is where the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN nuclear watchdog, is based. And our correspondent there, Bethany Bell, said that the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, was asked about whether Iran's nuclear program had only been set back a few months. And he said, I don't like this hourglass approach. It's in the eye of the beholder. But he said, in any case, the technological knowledge is there, the industrial capacity is there that no one can deny. So you are getting officials, I think, suggesting that this is not necessarily total destruction, total obliteration being set back by decades. Trump is sticking to his guns. But of course, the big question, Lucy, is if Iran still has a bit of uranium, actually quite a lot of uranium, 400 kilograms potentially at 60% enrichment that they may have moved out before those American strikes. If they still have any secret locations that they've not disclosed, will they now, after 12 days of being attacked by Israel and also the American bombs, rush to try to weaponize that? And potentially, could it be an even greater risk now than they were before?
And the reality is, Mark, most experts have been saying it's just too soon to say how much damage has been done. We'll have to wait a few more days for some of that to be verified. But meanwhile, is the ceasefire holding?
It is holding, Lucy, after a very shaky start, of course, in which both sides violated that ceasefire just hours after it came in, more than 24 hours ago. There were a couple of Iranian missiles that were intercepted in northern Israel and at least one instance of Israeli bombing in Tehran. But then, of course, that prompted that extraordinary outburst by Donald Trump in which he used that expletive to condemn both sides. He wanted to arrive where you are in The Hague, triumphant with a huge victory, and then he lashed out and called Benjamin Netanyahu on the plane to the Netherlands and said, pull your planes back. I mean, there were reports, Lucy, that Israel had as many as 10 or 20 planes, almost pretty much over the skies of Iran, ready for a massive bombing campaign. And then they had one kind of symbolic bomb, which President Trump said was like a plane wave to Iran, and then he pulled back. There are also reports that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to go off to DC to meet Donald Trump. I mean, I think that would be some kind of prize potentially for not going through with that bombing campaign. All of that to say that, in the 24 hours since it has held, for the first time, I have to say, Lucy, we were not called down to our shelters here in the hotel in Tel Aviv. The first night that has been the case since I arrived last week. It has not been a broken night for Israelis. It has not been a broken night for Iranians. And that is of some comfort after 12 days of hell, really, on both sides.
Mark, good to see you. Mark Lowen there in Jerusalem, joining us throughout the day, of course. Well, one of the countries which has committed to increasing defence spending wholeheartedly to 5% is the UK. Arriving at the summit, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer told reporters that the military alliance remains strong in the face of what he called global threats.
NATO is as relevant and as important today as it's ever been. We live in a very volatile world, and today is about the unity of NATO, showing that strength. We're bigger than we were before, we're stronger than we were before. There's a historic commitment in relation to spending. And for me, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it's important that we play an integral part, because the safety and security of our citizens in the UK is my first duty as Prime Minister. I take that extremely seriously. And in relation to our contribution, the increased defence spend, obviously that goes to our security. and our safety.
Keir Starmer there. Well, joining me now is our political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, I've been talking to a number of foreign ministers over the past few days and asking every single one of them, where's the money coming from in their budgets for this increase in defence spending? What would Sir Keir Starmer's answer be to that?
He'd say, I'll come back to you, or something slightly more diplomatic. In essence, they don't know yet. I mean, he makes an argument that says, look, for the next couple of years, the budget is sorted. He made an earlier promise to get defence spending in the UK up to 2.5% of national income, and it'll hit 2.6% by the year after next. But of course, this is a much more long-term ambition from the alliance as a whole, and from the UK in particular. Can they get to 5% in total by the middle of the next decade, about 1.5% for wider resilience, and then 3.5% on core defence spending. Now, the argument from the Defence Secretary, John Healey, is, look, you wouldn't expect any government a couple of general elections ahead to be able to budget for every sort of line in the spreadsheet, and he reckons that that is broadly in line with plenty of other NATO allies. But then there is the believability around all of that. I think from a UK perspective, there's an acknowledgement of, yes, the response to Donald Trump, the argument that Donald Trump was making in his first term about Europe stepping up to the plate as far as defence expenditure is concerned, but then also just the reality of the threats. But the big political challenge for the UK government, as for so many, is the trade-offs. If you're going to put that additional money into defence, where does it come from? At what cost to spending elsewhere, or at what cost to the tax burden?
Chris, you've just come from Canada and the G7, where you were with the Prime Minister as well. He's here with other leaders, but also with President Trump. How would you describe the relationship at the moment between the two?
It's a fascinating relationship because they are so wildly different. They are wildly different as politicians in terms of their political outlook. They are wildly different as characters, and yet they seem to have struck up a good, solid working relationship. I remember almost, when was it? A good while ago now, last September, when the Prime Minister, relatively new in office,
I'm just interrupting, Chris, because actually we're looking at the family photo that's being taken, and Sir Keir Starmer is standing right next to President Trump. I think we can see there with Mark Rutte in the middle, President Trump, and then just to the right of him, probably that's the left, is Sir Keir Starmer. So there he is, positioned right next to the President.
Yeah, and that sense of, as I say, that enduring relationship. I remember when I was travelling with the Prime Minister when he first met Donald Trump face to face, and it was at Trump Tower in New York during the United Nations General Assembly last autumn, and there was a great play at the time made by the Prime Minister and his team about how warm the relationship had been and all the rest of it, and not unreasonably us journalistic sceptics pondered how long might that last. But actually, over and over again as they've met since, that relationship does appear warm. The President going out of his way last week in Canada to be effusive in his praise of the Prime Minister. Those around the Prime Minister were quite sort of taken aback in a positive sense that the President was sort of repeating their own talking points in public in praising Keir Starmer. So, yeah, the absolute outlook of the Prime Minister has been one of, look, this is a relationship that has to be made to work, even if you're dealing with, and perhaps because you're dealing with a president who can be so wildly unpredictable.
They have to make it work because here the US is the most powerful member of NATO. It's essential. But Keir Starmer is also the leader of one of these countries that is also looking at another track when it comes to security and defence. Very busy forming close alliances with Germany and with France as well. I mean, he has to keep in mind, doesn't he, that we could see a withdrawal from the US from the NATO bloc, and that Europe really needs to step up, particularly when it comes to Ukraine.
Yeah, what on earth is Donald Trump going to do next is the sort of hanging question around this summit and around the next couple of years, really. That's the blunt truth of international geopolitics. You've seen the Prime Minister in his relationship with the E3, as it's known, so with France and Germany. There was a meeting last night with Emmanuel Macron and with Chancellor Merz. There's been a definitely different stance as far as how all three of those leaders have responded to America's actions in Iran, and a definite sort of difference of view there without question. And then also I think a bigger strategic challenge that Keir Starmer and European leaders are grappling with, which, yes, is personified by the Trump presidency, but will probably extend beyond it, which is America's international posture increasingly being shaped around the Pacific region and looking a little less in a European direction, and with the consequence that Europe is having to think more carefully about its own security, as opposed to, if you like, hovering under the American security umbrella. So in a curious sense, yes, it is all about Donald Trump, but some of those bigger strategic questions, I think, will probably outlive his presidency for a lot of European capitals.
And Chris, when it comes to the Middle East, we've just been hearing from President Trump. We were sharing with our viewers what he said this morning, saying that these strikes have caused a total obliteration of Iran's nuclear sites, setting back their nuclear program by decades. We heard from the Prime Minister on the Middle East today.
So this is interesting. So John Healey, the Defence Secretary, was asked specifically about this, and this anger from the President in response to these leaked reports around US intelligence and just how much damage was done. Mr. Healey absolutely saying he wouldn't be drawn on that. The Prime Minister's consistent view, going back to last week when we were in Canada prior to these attacks from America, it was talking about the importance of de-escalation, but also making this argument that only a diplomatic solution will secure, in his view, a long-term Iran that does not want to be nuclear armed. In other words, acknowledging that however successful or otherwise, and clearly the intelligence assessments are still going on as far as the attacks at the weekend, the arguments of the British government, a long-term diplomatic effort to ensure that there isn't the capacity or even the willingness to want to either start from scratch or start from wherever they currently are in attempting to get to that point at some point down the track where they have the bomb.
Chris, always great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Chris Mason joining us here in The Hague. Well, the military bloc's chief has insisted there is no alternative to this higher defence spending in the light of the ongoing global threat from Russia. Secretary General Mark Rutte telling reporters earlier that the war in Ukraine would be high on the agenda, alongside the push to get all of NATO countries to commit to at least 5% of their national income on defence.
These are difficult decisions, let's be honest. I mean, politicians have to make choices in scarcity. And this is not easy because 7-8 countries at the start of this year not at 2%. They will now reach the 2% this year. Many of those countries said we will do it somewhere in the 2030s. They've now committed to do it this year. And already we added in an aggregate of $1 trillion since 2016, since Trump 45 started his first presidency. But today, and this is the third stage, we will add trillions extra with this new plan. But of course, you're right. The countries have to find the money. It's not easy. These are political decisions. I totally recognize that. But at the same time, there is absolute conviction with my colleagues at the table that given the threat from the Russians, given the international security situation, there is no alternative. We've got to do this, really.
Mark Rutte there. More from The Hague coming up. Stay with us around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. Welcome back to the NATO summit at The Hague. Let's just take you to live pictures that we're getting at the moment. We can just see world leaders mingling with each other at the moment ahead of one of their sessions. We can see various leaders have had their family photo taken with President Trump just a short time ago. There he is in the crowd as well, just shaking hands and moving amongst the various world leaders who have gathered. We'll keep those live pictures up and see what interactions we can spot. With me, though, here outside of the summit venue is Christine Bozina, Managing Director of GMF. Good to have you with us, Christine. Now, the money. Everyone is talking about the money, the win that this is for President Trump and the win that this is for Mark Rutte as well, getting countries to commit to 5% of their GDP. But there's a little bit of creative accounting going on, isn't there, when we talk about this 5%? It's perhaps not as big and scary as some people are making out.
It's certainly not as scary. People are getting alarmed, and we're hearing even in the public forum, then you hear youth voices that are saying, well, why would you have to go to 5%? It's taking away. But I think that's not really the perspective that you should be having. Already, all of the countries have committed for 11 years to 2%. So what is this extra 3 that we're talking about? Half of it will be additional military defense spending. But even traditional defense now includes things like drones, AI technology, automation. This is an extra 1.5% on hard defense things over 10 years. Break up 1.5% over 10 years. And is that something you need to be very alarmed about? I would be very skeptical about that. But that extra 1.5% is the very flexible one. This is about roads, and it's about bridges. It's about infrastructure to make sure the military can move. It's about cybersecurity. It's about creating an innovation atmosphere, an environment in which in all of our societies, young entrepreneurs can say, I want to bring new technologies to bear. This is something that governments want to spend on, and young people want to spend on no matter what. We don't think about it as defense. We don't think about it as security spending. I don't think it's creative accounting as so much as it's essential policy creativity that we need to have.
So when you break it down in that way, is it enough?
Well, that's actually a different question. We probably need a lot more. And yesterday we heard, for example, the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, talk about the fact that it's not soon enough, and the numbers actually aren't all that high. Poland can get to 5% without adding all these extra things right now. Eastern flank countries are going 5% hard defense right now, which is why I think it feels so, in many ways, actually insulting for a country like Spain to say, there's absolutely no way we could get to 5%. Over the past few weeks, we've heard that this political resistance coming from Spain in particular. And is innovation not something that Spain needs to invest in? Is infrastructure something that is unnecessary for the country?
So as we see all of these global leaders meeting at the moment and discussing, are there divisions amongst them that are more than just about spending?
I think there are
political... They're trying to present a united front here, particularly with President Trump.
There's certainly an attempt to show a united front, but each one of these political leaders is a political leader to their citizens, to their constituencies, and trying to keep their coalitions stable. And so who are the coalition partners for the leaders who are here who don't really like the notion of defense spending? And do they have a political case to make at home for why defense spending isn't really just bullets and missiles, although important and partially there, but really a holistic transformation about what we're looking at? Because what does NATO need to defend against? Certainly, when you look at what's happening in Ukraine, absolutely air defense systems. That is a hard security thing that is essential, overdue, and we don't have enough of anywhere. But the other things are the daily attacks that we're facing in cybersecurity, the hybrid threats to infrastructure, the ability to even know what's going on under the sea, in the air, in space. The need to invest in technology that is both good for innovation and for development and growth in our societies, but also has a defense application, is essential. But our mindset, the notion of defense, is so stuck in a post-Cold War period, and not one in which the thing you have on your phone is also part of your protection, but potentially a way of being attacked, that we need to understand this better as a society and understand this is about moving faster and having tools that are better for all of us. And yes, it's defense, but it's not only defense. It's about where we need to grow and how we can do it safely and invest in our infrastructure, invest in our education systems to be more competitive.
So interesting to talk to you. Christine, thank you so much. We're just going to leave the conversation for a minute to listen in to NATO Chief Mark Rutte.
Message. In this meeting, we will take historic, transformational decisions to make our people safer through a stronger, fairer and more lethal NATO. To make NATO stronger, we have a concrete plan for all allies to spend 5% of GDP on defense. It will go towards core defense as well as defense and security-related investments. This decision is deeply rooted in our core mission and is required to resource our plans and readiness. This will also make NATO fairer, to ensure anyone and everyone contributes their fair share for our security. For too long, one ally, the United States, carried too much of the burden of that commitment. And that changes today. President Trump, dear Donald, you made this change possible. Your leadership on this has already produced $1 trillion in extra spending from European allies since 2016. And the decisions today will produce trillions more for our common defense to make us stronger and fairer by equalizing spending between America and America's allies. Allies will also agree to further increase defense production so that our armed forces have everything they need. That means a huge expansion of our defense industrial base on both sides of the Atlantic. That's good for our security, it's good for our economies and good for our jobs. Our decisions include continuing our support to Ukraine, while also pushing for a just and lasting peace. We all want the bloodshed to stop. We call on Russia to end its aggression against Ukraine. Let me now turn to Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Dick Schoof, whose government and people are graciously hosting us here. Thank you to the media for joining us. We will continue our discussions in just a moment, but first, and with the media here, please, Dick Schoof, your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mark. Colleagues, friends, allies, on behalf of the Dutch government, welcome to The Hague. This is the NATO summit, the first NATO summit ever to be held in the Netherlands. And we are honored to have you here in this city that has been speaking in the language of peace and justice ever since the first Hague Peace Conference was held in 1899. I'm convinced that after today, The Hague will also be known as a city of collective purpose, unity and resolve. After all, we are about to write history. We are about to make decisions leading to an unprecedented increase in our collective defense spending and a new financial balance in our alliance. Both are urgent, both are necessary, and both will help make our transatlantic bond even stronger, so we can do justice to our founding principles of democracy, liberty and the rule of law, as laid down in the Washington Treaty. The last NATO event held in The Hague was a foreign minister meeting in 1989, just as the Iron Curtain was beginning to break apart on the eve of the Cold War's end. And for a period, we hoped and believed that relations with Russia would continue to thaw. But the end of history turned out to be an illusion. An illusion that was shattered for good when Russia brutally invaded Ukraine. So today, there is a renewed awareness in our ranks that peace cannot be taken for granted, that it must be protected constantly and with conviction. And yes, peace comes at a cost. We must act on this swiftly and decisively. So let's stand united and embrace the The Hague Defence Investment Plan. Let's go to work and write that history today. Thank you.
That was Dick Schoof, the Dutch Prime Minister, talking about how this summit could potentially be history-making with this agreed increase in funding for the collective defence of NATO members. He also talked about Ukraine and said what has happened with Russia's invasion means that peace cannot be taken for granted. Christine Bozina is still with me. President Zelensky is here. He will be relieved to hear that Ukraine, when we hear from Mark Rutte and from the Dutch Prime Minister, is getting prominence. What can he hope to get out of this meeting, Christine?
That already is a very big win for President Zelensky. There was a question coming into this week how big of a role European issues are going to play, and frankly with the Iran strikes in the last week, this was a question. We've been successful, it looks like thus far, to keep the focus on European issues. But then Ukraine, which often seems separate in Washington from the Europe question, is actually getting a good amount of attention here. We had Zelensky in the dinner last night. We have had meetings that seem to be respectful and smooth. And there's always a pit in everyone's stomach. How will there be a Ukraine conversation? How will it go? Are we going to see fireworks that we do not want, but instead see that long-term steady support for Ukraine and Ukraine's ambitions for sovereignty, for freedom? And it looks like we're seeing that here. Again, nothing's over, but so far so good.
Dick, you've talked about this wanting to see a peaceful solution and the long term for Ukraine. Is NATO doing enough so that Ukraine can't just continue to exist and fight, but to try and win?
Absolutely, that Ukraine needs to try to win. It needs to actually win. It needs to maintain its sovereignty and to maintain its territory and to say what path it wants for the future.
But they need more. They need more weapons.
Yes.
They need more fighter jets. They need. I mean, just the list of things Ukraine needs is incredibly long. Are they going to get any more of that from their NATO friends?
So when we talk about defense funding again here, Ukraine support will be built into that 5% in some way. Thus far, help for Ukraine has again been apart from what you're doing on defense as a NATO ally. If we're putting Ukraine support into these big targets, I think it can make it easier within each country to provide more money. But you can't just triple count. You have to actually invest in this. The problems that are going to come for the rest of Europe if Ukraine is not successful are not something you can simply wish away. You will do it by providing Ukraine the best tools possible, which means paying attention, but really providing the financial and also industry support.
So tell me more about that. When you say if Ukraine is not successful, what do you think the implications are for Europe if they're not?
Existential. And Europe as a whole, if you look along the eastern flank, we've had somewhat quiet conditions since the full-scale invasion. That is different this year. You look at Russia building new military bases, creating new army corps in Finland. So this is their interest, but it is a place where they feel that they need to put money and attention despite the Ukraine war. We're going to have a very large military exercise, Zapad, West, in Russian, where Russia and Belarus are this fall going to be exercising their military capabilities, not in Ukraine, but really on NATO's borders. They're not sleeping. They're not interested in only focusing on Ukraine. NATO would be tremendously naive to think that if Russia is not only focusing on Ukraine, that NATO should not also be looking at itself and Ukraine at the same time and looking at the fact that hunger in the Kremlin, it keeps on growing until it is clear that it will not be successful. NATO with the 5%, but also with what they do with it, the capabilities it buys, the unity it shows, the deterrence it puts in place this year will be the answer to whether Russia can get away with anything more.
Christine, thank you so much, and you have nicely set up the interview I'm about to do, thank you, with Mikhail Kazyanov, who is the former Russian Prime Minister, joining us from Riga. Very good to have you with us. We're just hearing there from Christine and from others here at NATO that Russia poses an existential threat to all of Europe. What do you believe Russia's intentions are beyond Ukraine?
Putin's Russia, as of today, of course, that is a threat for European security at least. That's definitely the case. And I think that is the war against Ukraine, that is the clear demonstration of intention of Putin just to expand and to undertake this aggression to the extent the West allows him to do.
How does President Putin right now view NATO? What is his thinking?
Yeah, I think just mostly just NATO. That's about his vision. That's Ukraine, and further, I would say, just creating influence in the world. Mr. Putin dreams to sit down together with the President of the United States and to settle just the issues of the world, just to discuss the fates of the nations of the world, and as it was in the Soviet Union and the US in the past. That's his role. He doesn't care about NATO expansion. In fact, he only uses an argument. When the Baltic states became the NATO members, there was no any concern in Russia. At that time, I was in their office. When Finland recently just joined NATO, that also was not a problem for Putin. Ukraine, that's a little bit different. That's not about NATO. That's about Ukraine. Putin recently said that Ukrainians and Russians are only one nation. That is not true, of course, just Ukrainians very close, but it's different nation. But they're very close to Russians, and we both just were in the Soviet occupation, I will put this way, in the Soviet regime, and we were very similar and historically, and that's why for Putin that is the danger. To let Ukraine to develop independently, to build up a democratic state with as part of Europe and member of NATO. That is about Ukraine. That's not about NATO itself. But that's what aggression is. But the main problem, the West should make it a consistent and principled decision to, of course, defend Ukraine, which is already just announced, and just to undertake more efforts to let Ukraine to defend themselves and to defend their territorial integrity and sovereignty, of course.
You mentioned that period when you were the Prime Minister in the early 2000s. What was Vladimir Putin's thinking about NATO then? Because wasn't there a time where he actually wanted to join? What changed? What happened?
Oh yeah, at that time, that's I very well remember. At that time, I stated that I dreamed my country, Russian Federation, just becoming a full-fledged member of NATO publicly. Mr. Putin made statement a little bit softer. He said he didn't exclude, didn't rule out such a development. But of course, joining NATO, that means just building trust. Trust couldn't appear just overnight. That's why Mr. Putin didn't want to wait. But we had all opportunities at that time. We established the Russian NATO Council in Rome in 2002, and we had very good relations with the United States. We had excellent relations with the European Union. Everything looked very successful and very just prosperous. But later on, Putin started to change his attitude. He started to demonstrate his real nature as a KGB agent and his aggressive stand. And when the criticism appeared on him on the violation of human rights in Russia, he started to change his attitude to the West. He started saying that the Russia is surrounded by enemies, and then his Munich speech, he already just indicated that he would like to change the whole architecture of security. But at that time, the Western leaders didn't take it seriously. It was no reason to take it seriously. But then later we know what happened in 2008, invasion of Georgia, and then just no reaction. 3 months after this, just business as usual, and reset policy appeared in that time. Then later, just Putin decided that is the permission how to behave, and annexation of Crimea was absolutely just under this umbrella, and there was also no serious reaction on that. That's how we come to such a situation. Now it is much more serious than before.
Indeed. Mikhail Kazyanov, thank you very much for joining us from Riga. Very good to get your thoughts. Well, I'm pleased to say that joining me here at The Hague is Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who is the former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Very good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us here on BBC News. Already today, we have heard Mark Rutte and the Dutch Prime Minister forcefully talking about defending Ukraine and NATO needing to support Ukrainian troops and President Zelensky as well. Will that come as a relief that we still see Ukraine front and centre here, despite everything that's happening in the Middle East and the conversations being around what's happening in the Middle East?
You actually answered the question you raised. Frankly, I had very low expectations. But as of now, we can tell you for sure that we are okay with the final statements, and we are okay with the Ukraine, which is still in the spotlight of NATO member states.
So you feel it is enough in the spotlight?
Well, I feel that we are in the spotlight, and I do understand that all NATO member states clearly recognize the threat that Russia poses. But my gut feeling is that NATO needs to do more. And we expect to get more deliverables out of NATO, because they invest into their own security. And it's crystal clear that the more you invest in your own security and the more you invest into Ukraine, the more security you're going to get.
What are the deliverables that you would like to see then?
Ammo, and ammo.
There's a shortage of gunpowder at the moment, actually.
Absolutely. So, and we expect that Americans will jump on the Americans will be back on board, because as of now, there is no clarity on the side of the U.S. administration whether this administration is ready to provide a security aid package for Ukraine. Because Ukraine is still getting a lot of ammo from our Western allies and from the United States. But this is the package that have been co-sponsored and passed by the previous administration. So I expect that my president to get along with Trump during this meeting, because we expect to have this meeting as soon as possible. And it's all about the actions that have to be taken by President Trump in order to support Ukraine and in order to support U.S. security.
Is that exhausting for Ukrainians, having to wait and see what the mood is of President Trump, what he says from one day to the next when it comes to Ukraine, depending on who he's spoken to?
Frankly, we don't have another option. So the only option which is on the table is to ask, to convince, to talk, to debate, and to get what is needed for the security of Ukraine and for the security of the entire free world.
And President Trump is one thing, what he's saying, but what are the conversations that are happening on other levels? Are you getting reassuring words from America, at other diplomatic levels and military levels as well?
Look, we still get bipartisan support in the U.S. Senate. You've seen this secondary sanction bill that has been co-sponsored by 84 senators from both sides of the aisle. So I believe that we still have this real support among the Ukrainian, American political establishment. But what they are waiting for the green light from the Oval Office. And I believe that Trump, he doesn't want to be outplayed by Putin. He doesn't want to be weak in the eyes of all dictators that are closely watching what kind of steps this administration is to undertake in order to show whether this administration is ready to fight for peace or no. On the flip side, yesterday Secretary General was very clear, saying that Ukraine is to get around 40 billion of military support. It's a staggering number, and mainly this kind of burden sharing right now rests on the shoulders of the European Union and Canada. So let me reiterate the message once again. We wait for the decision of the US administration to jump on this and to be more decisive in helping Ukraine. It is in the clear interest of the US national security to help Ukraine. The more they invest into the Ukraine, the less they will have invest into their own security. Because Ukraine did an amazing work in terms of dismantling Russian forces.
How has the last few weeks been in Ukraine? These devastating drone attacks from Russia. Numbers are huge. Hundreds of drones being sent across every night. High civilian death toll, damage to infrastructure, people not sleeping, having to go to bunkers. How are Ukrainians dealing with it and feeling?
We are bruised, but not broken. We are tired, but not exhausted. We have a strong will to win. And we will win, and that's the reason why we need the support of the entire free world. The mood is different, very different. But, Ukrainian people, they are very resilient. And that's the reason why I urge all our Western friends to help Ukraine and to help Ukrainian people. We deserve this help.
As you know, the courage, the resilience of Ukrainians is admired the world over with everything you're enduring. Thank you very much for taking the time. Pleasure to see you. Thank you. Stay with us for continuing coverage from The Hague, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
Welcome back to BBC News. I'm Mark Lowen in Tel Aviv, where after a shaky start, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding. It comes as President Trump told reporters at the NATO summit in The Hague that Iran's nuclear sites were completely destroyed in the US strikes last week. His comments came after the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced that an inquiry into a leaked US intelligence evaluation concluded that Tehran's nuclear program was set back by just a few months following those attacks. Details of the initial damage assessment were leaked to the BBC's US partner CBS and other media.
That's actually quite common. I've seen quite a few broadcasts.
Briefing was originally reported by CNN. Its preliminary finding is that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium was not destroyed, and its centrifuges used to enrich the nuclear fuel are largely intact. CNN quoted one official as saying the US set them back maybe a few months tops. While speaking at The Hague, Pete Hegseth said the Pentagon report leak had a political motive behind it.
Well, Mr. President, when you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to. So it was a flawless mission.
Flawless.
Right down where we knew they needed to enter. And given the 30,000 pounds of explosives and capability of those munitions, it was devastation underneath Fordo. And the amount of munitions, 6 per location, any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary. It was low confidence. All right, so this isn't, you make assessments based on what you know.
And it said it could be very devastating, very serious.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
Pete Hegseth there, the US Defense Secretary. Well, the BBC's Dan Johnson is in Jerusalem. And as I said, the ceasefire seems to be holding. I spoke to him a little earlier. Take a listen.
After all the twists and turns of yesterday, the furious intervention of Donald Trump overnight and this morning, that ceasefire does seem to be effective. We've seen no exchanges of fire, no reports of any attacks either way between Iran or Israel overnight. But there are these growing questions about how effective those strikes have been, and there are questions still hanging about the future in terms of Iran's nuclear program. There were details to be hammered out about whether Iran could continue using nuclear research to try to produce energy and electricity for the country. What sort of monitoring would be in place if Iran were permitted to do that? How would Israelis be reassured that there wasn't an attempt once more, as they see it, for Iran to try to get a nuclear weapon? The International Atomic Energy Agency would be important in that sort of monitoring. There's a suggestion from the Iranian parliament this morning that Iran will refuse to cooperate with the IEA in future. Now that's a move that perhaps they're putting in place some sort of bargaining chip for these negotiations that may be to come about the future relationship between Israel and Iran, and how other countries in this region can be reassured that Iran is not going to pose a threat in future.
Given those fears, Dan, that a damaged Iran with some nuclear stockpile still intact could now even pose, perhaps to some extent, a greater risk in trying to rush towards weaponizing that remaining uranium, how is this all being framed in Israel? Still as a huge political victory, or is there a faction within the Israeli government or beyond saying that the war should have continued and the government should have gone further?
There are those voices in the Israeli government that always wanted this to go further, who were urging Benjamin Netanyahu to push on for regime change, to perhaps take out the Iranian Ayatollah. Some thought that this shouldn't have stopped just with those rather limited US strikes over the weekend on the nuclear sites. They wanted to see this go further. We know Iran still has ballistic missiles that it was able to fire at this country yesterday. So although the message from Benjamin Netanyahu and others at the top of government is that these threats have been neutralised, and that is being emphasised again this morning. No doubt Iran still has a certain ballistic missile capability, and the radioactive material, the uranium that is involved in its nuclear program, was, the Iranians say, successfully evacuated, moved to other secret sites. And the threat is now that it quietly starts rebuilding that program without international monitoring. But then again, we have seen how effective Israeli intelligence has been in monitoring events and activities on the ground in Iran. All of that to be worked out for the future. The hope that the ceasefire can hold for now, but with growing doubts about the effectiveness of these strikes, it is possible that the Israeli leadership comes under pressure to do something more to reassure Israelis that they aren't going to be under threat in the future.
Dan Johnson in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the UN children's charity UNICEF has sharply criticised the system for distribution of food aid by the Israeli and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The spokesman said sending starving people to combat zones to receive food handouts was ludicrous. On Tuesday, 46 Palestinians were shot dead, reportedly by the Israelis, while waiting for food. Well, according to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza, at least 868 people were killed in Gaza during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, including the latest figures from yesterday. The Israeli military says 7 of its soldiers have been killed in southern Gaza after an armoured vehicle they were in was hit by an explosive device. The IDF says a Palestinian militant group was behind the attack. Well, let's speak to Shayna Lowe now, who is the Norwegian Refugee Council's communications advisor in the Palestinian territories. Shayna Lowe, very good to speak to you. What more do you have for us about the killings in the last 24 hours, or indeed that keep on happening at these food distribution points? What are your colleagues telling you?
Well, we're, of course, increasingly concerned and disturbed by the images coming out of Gaza as desperate families that have been starved and deprived of meaningful aid for over 115 days are forced to make a choice between trying to stave off starvation and feed their families or risk their lives while trying to do so. We knew, as the humanitarian sector, partners of the United Nations, that this system, this scheme devised with the US and Israeli backing would lead to chaos, that these are not humanitarians, these are not people guided by humanitarian principles, and that they are not providing any sort of meaningful aid to stave off the starvation, health, shelter, water, fuel crises that have taken over and are spread throughout all of the Gaza Strip at this point.
Shayna, why is this happening? What is the inherent problem within this new mechanism that is leading it to be called by the UN a death trap?
Well, there are a number of problems with the way that this system was set up. First and foremost is that we as humanitarians know that in order to give people aid, you need to reach them where they are. Expecting Palestinians to walk through literal combat zones in order to access food is just ridiculous. It's not protecting civilians, it's putting their lives at risk. Additionally, we knew that having armed mercenaries overseeing these distributions would inevitably lead to some type of fallout. These are not people trained to work in communities. These are not people trained to conduct humanitarian aid distributions. These are our soldiers, essentially, who have been hired to guard a site and lure people to their deaths.
Shayna Lowe from the Norwegian Refugee Council humanitarian organisation. We will have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your thoughts. Much more coming up from us throughout the day, but for now I will hand you back to Sarah in London.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and we'll be back to Mark in Tel Aviv and Lucy in The Hague soon. But now it's time to head to Glastonbury because the gates have opened and around 200,000 people have started to make their way onto the site of the world-famous music festival. And our reporter, Charlotte Gallagher, is there. Hi to you, Charlotte. So these are presumably the very keenest people who've queued up overnight and they really want to get a good spot for their tents.
They are, Sarah. I mean, people were queuing here from 1 o'clock this morning. There were hundreds of people lined up outside the gates of Glastonbury, and just before 8 a.m. they were allowed in. Some running, some sprinting with all their kit, so they got a really good camping position, not too far from all the action, but not too close as well, so they get a bit of sleep. And you can see behind me, that is the famous pyramid stage, which many people have seen on television, or perhaps you've been to Glastonbury before. Guys, would you like to say hello? Hi. You're on the BBC.
Hi, BBC.
No way.
Hey, BBC.
What are your names and where are you from?
Ewan. Esther, we're from Somerset.
You're from Somerset. This is
Yeah.
very local to
Yeah,
you.
it is.
And is this your first Glastonbury?
No, many.
So this is my first Glastonbury.
Is it?
What are the tips for having a good time, enjoying yourself?
Just go to who you want. Like, don't let people tell you, like, you should go here. Like, just go to who you want to go to.
Don't make stupid mistakes. No,
Yeah.
like drugs or anything. That's the best thing. You don't know what's in it.
Also getting lost. I'm finding it quite difficult to find my way around.
Yeah.
It's absolutely huge.
You've a bug in your hair.
I've got a bug in my hair. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you very much. And who are you looking forward to seeing?
Ray.
Ray?
I'm so
Wonder Horse.
Well, have an amazing
And you?
time. You're very loaded up. Look at all
We
this
are,
time.
we are.
You look like you're going to be comfortable though. 'cause you've
We're
got-
prepared.
Hopefully, yeah, we're prepared.
What is the one thing you have to bring when you camp? Obviously a tent, but what?
Water.
A chair.
A
A chair. A chair.
Water.
Water.
And your tent. And your
Yeah.
sleeping bag.
Exactly.
Have an
Yeah.
amazing
Thank you
time,
so
guys.
much.
Thank you so much. So you can see there's some of the people that are coming. They're arriving with their tents on their backs. People have got trolleys. I've even seen one man, Sarah, with a wheelie bin full of stuff, pushing it up a hill. He had his tent, everything in there, his clothes, everything, a wheelie bin, and he was pushing up the hill in order to get to his camping spot. Hopefully, we can find out what exactly he had in there as well as his tent later on, because it was absolutely huge. More people as well coming with their trolleys, got their sleeping bags in there, and this is really the calm before the storm, Sarah, before it all really starts on Friday. So it's a chance for people to relax before the partying really starts. The headline act on Friday, that's the 1975, and it's a very full day of musical action.
Charlotte, really good to see you. And the great thing is that in amongst all that preparation, what they probably won't need is wellies, because the weather's looking pretty good.
It does indeed. I'm absolutely thrilled that there's no torrential rain, and it's also not a heat wave. We've kind of got the best of both worlds, because you never know with Glastonbury. There have been years where it's been torrential rain, mud up to your knees, but this year the British weather has been very well behaved, and it looks like it's going to be very good for the next few days.
Charlotte, good to see you. I'm sure we'll be back to you throughout the day. We'll also, of course, be back to The Hague for that second day of the NATO summit. Stay with us.
One thing I can say which is true of this region is that it's become harder to be a journalist. It's really important to be on the ground. If that means you've got to go to hostile, remote places, then we have to do that.
That's the opium resin. There's a very pungent smell of it in the air right now.
The Delta wave of COVID devastated India, and I think it was the coverage that we did for the BBC at the time which brought international attention.
What's happening here could affect the world's ability to recover from the pandemic.
We've met with families who've had to do the unthinkable.
Another person came up and asked if we'd like to buy their child. The desperation is hard to put in words.
Many of the stories we've had to tell are distressing, they're difficult, but that's usually an indicator that they're really important stories to tell.